I have been feeding my sourdough starter for weeks now, and she looks like she's ready to make some sourdough bread. So in this video, I'm going to show you my first attempt at homemade sourdough. And this was definitely a learning experience, so please let me know in the comments any tips or tricks that you use when making your own homemade sourdough bread, because there are a lot of things I would have improved in this recipe. This sourdough bread only requires 4 ingredients. We have our sourdough starter, some white all-purpose flour, a little bit of salt, and then some water. I also use a scale to measure everything out, and of course a bowl to mix everything in. I start by putting my bowl on the scale, setting it to 0, and then weighing out 325 grams of flour. And then I weighed out 200 grams of water. Now next time, I wouldn't put my water in an A&W cup because it spilled everywhere, and I poured it too fast, so I accidentally weighed out 203 grams of water. So next time, I'm going to be more accurate. Then I weighed out 75 grams of my sourdough starter. And the final ingredient was 10 grams of salt. One improvement for next time is that I will weigh out all of these ingredients separately. This will hopefully help me be a little bit more accurate. After all the ingredients were in the bowl, I just took a spatula and combined them all together. I realized that the spatula wasn't really doing much, so I ended up using my bare hands to knead the dough and combine all the ingredients. I kneaded the dough for about 10 minutes until everything was combined and my bread looked like this. The next step was to let the dough proof and sit just at room temperature for about 2 to 3 hours. After that proofing time, I kneaded the dough again for about 5 to 10 minutes and let it rest for about 20 minutes before I put it on a floured surface so that I could shape it into an oval bread shape. I may have over-kneaded the dough, and I definitely did not shape it correctly, so those are a few things I would change in my next iteration. Once I had my dough shaped into a little loaf, I put it into my bread bowl, and then it was ready for its second proof, which means I covered it in plastic wrap and let it sit out at room temperature for another 2 hours. After the second proof, I put it in the fridge overnight. And this is what my bread looked like the next day. Now day 2 was baking day. I preheated my oven to 445 degrees Fahrenheit, and I put my Dutch oven pot into the oven to heat up as well. At the same time, I had my bread sitting out so that it could warm back up to room temperature. Now, I don't know what happened, but the top of my pot totally burnt off. This is what you get from ordering off Facebook Marketplace. Regardless, I moved on to the next step, which was to score my dough. Now, I watched a few YouTube videos, and it said that you want to do a few artistic scores and an expansion score. So I used a razor blade to cut a long expansion score into the dough. And then I also added a few artistic scores. I was actually really happy with how it turned out. In my next iteration, I might make the scores a little bit deeper. And with that, it was time to bake my bread. I took my Dutch oven out of the stove. It was really hot, so be careful if you're doing this. I took the lid off, and then I just plopped the dough into the Dutch oven. I covered it back up, and then I put it in the oven for 25 minutes. After 25 minutes, I took the lid off and cooked it for another 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, I could tell it was a nice golden brown, so I decided to take it out. Next time, I think I'll cook it for a little bit longer, so it gets a little bit more charred and crispy on the top. And honestly, at this point, I was super excited because it smelled so good. And I thought it looked really beautiful, at least for my first sourdough loaf. I let it rest for a little bit, but honestly, I couldn't help myself, and we cut into it right away, and it was so delicious. Now, it didn't rise as much as I had hoped it would, so let me know in the comments if you have any tips for making your sourdough rise a little bit bigger. Overall, it was absolutely delicious, and I thoroughly enjoyed making sourdough bread for the first time.